the late Edward de Bono had something very interesting to say about the role of emotions in reasoning. Now, a lot of us like to think that we're very logical thinkers. What Edward de Bono suggested is that actually we basically tend to use our emotions ultimately to evaluate situations. And there's a kind of time lag, there's this little interval. Generally, we have these habits of perception, and then we fall immediately into those habits. And then as a result of those habits, almost unconsciously, we then apply a kind of emotional evaluation of the situation. This is good, that's bad, I like this, I don't like that. And what Edward de Bono gave us was a whole set of tools for prolonging that interval between perception and evaluation from an emotional perspective. So, for example, one very simple tool that sounds almost too simple to be worth bothering with until you try it and realize how effective it is called the PMI. So this means positive, negative, and interesting. And the idea is, instead of making a pros and cons list, which is what the exercise looks like, it's like, oh, that's just a pros and cons list, don't need to listen, right? But this is different. So you look consistently, if you're doing this in a group, everyone looks in the same direction at the same time. So everyone looks for the pros in a situation. Even if their initial response is, that's terrible, they try, earnest attempt, what are the positives in this situation? And then collectively together, we all look in the direction of what are the negatives in this situation. And then we look in the direction of what's interesting about this situation. So we don't know whether it's a pro or it's a con, it's something we might need more information about. It's just some kind of oddball suggestion that someone comes up with that might be relevant. It doesn't need categorizing as positive or negative. And the difference between doing this and having a pros and cons and jumping, doing this, is that first of all it's collective. So we suspend our prejudice, even if we hear this idea and we're against it. First of all, we try and we do the positive. And even if we're really for the idea, we try and do the negative. And then the whole interesting thing is like, have we got all the information we need? And as a result of this process, you can have a complete day and night different response to an initial idea than what we would have had if we hadn't gone through this process. Another example, the proposition was all children should be given spending money at school. And then they discussed this. And, the pros are, it's great, I can buy loads of sweets or whatever, I can save up and I can buy some trainers or whatever. Negatives, what about bullying? That could happen, couldn't it? And what about, where's the money going to come from? Does it mean less money for other things? And as a result of this exercise, which they did with quite a few different groups of children apparently, very often the case was, initially the response was, of course there should be money for, pocket money for all children at school or whatever. But then through going through this exercise, a very significant proportion of the children that had initially been for the proposal, had actually reversed their position. And this is the effect that these tools can have. It's not like, trying to manipulate people. It's actually just broadening our perception so that we don't go straight from the initial biased perspective, because we all have these habits of perception, shortcuts, which otherwise known as cognitive biases and prejudices. And if we go immediately from that initial perception to what really makes a decision, which is our emotions, then we don't have as full a picture or as accurate a map as we can. And so we may make very poor decisions based on that incomplete perspective. And all these tools, and the PMI that I talked about just now is just one of them, are ways of broadening our perception so that eventually when we kind of hand over to what really makes the decisions, which is the emotions, apparently, and it does kind of make sense, then we're less likely to be in error because we have a fuller picture. So, like it or not, emotional reasoning, it's a big deal. We all do it. It's not just women. I've heard people say this is what women do. Men are logical. I disagree strongly with that claim. So anyway, thanks for watching.